Thank you, Mr. Larson, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. Gentlemen, I am honored to be with you tonight. Last year, during a long campaign season, 2 campaigns and 2 elections, there was no issue in Western Pennsylvania that came to me from my constituents more often than Social Security. And it was usually with a heavy heart. I'll never forget one man who came up to me at an event, and he was about 7 years old. And he told me how he started paying into Social Security when he was 12. They don't really make them like that anymore, but in Western Pennsylvania, people kept working at earlier and earlier ages to make ends meet. The gentleman had worked in a factory. He'd been laid off. He told me we were in the streets, not sure where to go during the day, but we didn't want our kids to know that we were out of the work. He had 5 kids. He became a janitor, got hurt on the job, needed his union to stick up for him, but that cut into his prime years of earnings. So the gentleman becomes 65, he retires, eventually collects Social Security, but he still works to this day as a janitor. So he's telling me all about his life, and he pulls out one of those big key rings that every janitor seems to have, and he shoves it into my hand, and he had pulled off of it the dog tag that he carried when he served in the U.S. Army in Korea in the 1950s, and he pressed it into my palm, and he just looked up at me and said, "Don't you break your promise to us. If you get a chance to go down to Washington, D.C., you fight for Social Security, you fight for Medicare. You promised these programs to us, and you've got to keep your promise." I'll tell you, Mr. Larson, I don't think a man his age and his experience wanted to have to stand there and ask a 33-year-old young congressional candidate to stick up for him in that way. That was a promise that we made, and it's not an entitlement. It's something he paid into over 45, 50 years of a working life. Have you met constituents like that back in Connecticut as well?
Oh, no question about it. We were just at a senior center in Elmwood on Friday, and the same experience. I think it really, people find it annoying when this is called an entitlement, especially when they know they've worked all of their lives for this. They only had to look at their pay stub to know that they have made these contributions, and to say that this is an entitlement when you the investment that you've made over a lifetime, nothing could be further from the truth. And that's why it's so important that we get Social Security 2100 Act passed into law.
It's the most important thing we can work on in this Congress for many of the people who are affected. The problem is, as you said, it hasn't been adjusted since the 1980s, and a couple of really important things have happened since then. When Tip and President Reagan struck the last deal on Social Security, there wasn't the heroin epidemic that we see today. And one of the problems that we have in Western Pennsylvania is we're losing a lot of young parents in their 30s and 40s to heroin and fentanyl and prescription drug overdoses. And because they come from good families, their aunts and uncles and their parents are stepping up and taking care of the kids that are left behind. So I've run into dozens and dozens of senior citizens in Western PA who are raising kids on their Social Security benefit. They're working part-time too, but they can barely make ends meet. Social Security wasn't designed for that.
And, it's interesting that you point that out, because people oftentimes think of Social Security only as a pension benefit. And as you just pointed out, 1 in 5 recipients are currently on Social Security who are not retired, who are spouses, or there are children because of a death in the family that took place. And so here it is, the nation's single most important insurance program, taking care of those individuals, even in cases of calamity, whether it be through the opioid crisis or whatever the case may be. And so that's why Social Security remains so vitally important to all generations at all ages.
And it's why we need to make sure that those who do choose to continue work, which many will do, see the benefits of that work. Here we are calling for a tax cut and promising to account for every penny of it with a proper adjustment to the other taxes and the payroll tax. You'd almost think we were Republicans standing up here tonight. But the Republicans instead have chosen a path through their tax bill to cut taxes for a very different group of people. the people who make more than $500,000 a year, and the people on the boards of the largest and most powerful corporations in our country. And I think that's what frustrates so many people today is, the average Social Security benefit now at this point is what, about $16,000? And the people that benefited from the tax cut in 2017 make $500,000, $1 million, or even more than that per year. There are far more people earning closer to $16,000 in this country than there are at the very top. If we're going to have special breaks in the tax code for anyone, or if we're going to do anything with our tax laws to benefit anyone, it should be those folks who are just trying to get by. They're not going on vacation with this money. They're not going to Disney World, and they're not going on a cruise. They're paying for prescription drugs. They're paying for groceries. Mr. Clyburn just talked about hunger and how Fritz Hollings was fighting hunger 40 and 50 years ago. Well, senior citizens in the United States are going hungry today. They've got a very simple choice. They've got a certain amount of money. They can go to the grocery store or the drugstore, but they can't do both. And usually they go to the drugstore to stay alive, and they